I stood in the center of the courtroom with steady hands, though my heart hammered against my ribs like a gavel. My uncle sat with his legs crossed, chuckling as if this were a harmless family prank until he smirked and claimed they did this legally. The judge stopped looking at him. He stared straight at me. They all thought I was just the niece who filed paperwork, never suspecting I had turned their legal technicalities into the perfect trap. My name is Tatum Henderson, and I learned a long time ago that the dinner table at the Harrington estate was not a place for nourishment. It was a courtroom where the jury had already been bribed, and the verdict was decided before the appetizers were even served. Sunday dinner was a ritual, a mandatory performance of familial loyalty that felt more like a hostage situation disguised with expensive linen napkins and crystal stemware. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, the spot usually reserved for children or guests of no consequence. 34 years old, I was neither, but in the hierarchy of the Harrington family, I occupied a space that was arguably lower than both. To them, I was the bland niece, the invisible woman, the one who wore beige cardigans and drove a 6-year-old sedan and worked a government job that paid a salary. My uncle probably spent on cigars in a single quarter. I worked in the administrative division of the Ashford County Court. To my family, this meant I was a glorified secretary who stamped papers and fetched coffee for people who actually mattered. They saw my life as a series of safe, boring choices that resulted in a safe, boring existence. They were wrong, but I never corrected them. The air in the dining room was thick, smelling of roasted garlic, and the heavy floral perfume my aunt wore to cover the scent of her third glass of Chardonnay. The centerpiece was a sprawling arrangement of white leaves that blocked my view of my cousin across the table, which was a mercy. The only person who mattered tonight was sitting at the head of the table, Raymond Harrington, my uncle. He was cutting into a slice of prime rib with a surgical precision that was almost unsettling. Raymond was 55, tanned from weekends in Florida, and wore a watch that cost more than my entire student loan balance. He was the self-proclaimed patriarch, the man who had taken the family business, a mid-sized logistics firm, and kept it afloat through sheer force of personality and aggressive leverage. In the Harrington lexicon, Raymond was the sun around which we were all expected to orbit. He measured success in square footage and horsepower. If you could not touch it, drive it, or mortgage it, it did not count. "The market is softening," Raymond announced, his voice booming comfortably in the acoustic perfection of the dining room. He did not look up from his plate. He did not have to. He knew everyone was listening. "I told the guys at the club yesterday that cash is trash right now. You have to be in hard assets, land, development. That is where the legacy is built." He took a bite of meat, chewing slowly, his eyes scanning the table to ensure his wisdom was being absorbed. "That makes sense, Ray?" my aunt murmured, nodding a little too eagerly. I kept my eyes on my fork. I was pushing a single green pea around the rim of my plate. I knew exactly what this speech was leading to. It was the same speech he had been giving for 6 months, ever since my grandmother, Evelyn Harrington, had taken a turn for the worse. Grandma Evelyn sat to Raymond's right. She was 89 years old and looked as if she were made of parchment paper and bird bones. Her eyes, once sharp enough to spot a lie from 3 rooms away, were now milky and distant. She picked at her mashed potatoes with a trembling hand. She was the owner of this house. She was the owner of the massive lakefront property 3 towns over that had been in our family for 70 years, and she was the beneficiary of the family trust that controlled it all. She was the bank, and Raymond was the robber who had convinced himself he was the security guard. Tatum Raymond said the sound of my name made my spine stiffen, but I kept my face neutral. I looked up. Raymond was smiling at me, but the smile did not reach his eyes. It was a predator smile showing too many teeth. "How is life down at the courthouse?" he asked. The question was not an inquiry. It was a setup. It is busy, I said, my voice steady. We are processing a lot of new filings this month, Raymond chuckled. A dry, dismissive sound that signaled to the rest of the table that it was okay to laugh. Filings, right? Keeping the wheels of bureaucracy turning. It must be nice to have a job where you do not have to worry about the bottom line. You just punch a clock and go home, right? Something like that, I said. See, that is the difference, Raymond said, gesturing with his steak knife. In the real world, Tatum, we do not just file papers. We have to create value. We have to take risks. I was looking at that lake lot of moms the other day. It is sitting there doing nothing, just eating up property taxes. A crime, really. I have a developer lined up who wants to put 12 luxury condos on that water. 12? Do you know what that would do for the family trust? I took a sip of water. I knew exactly what it would do. It would liquidate the only tangible history our family had left and convert it into cash that Raymond would likely pour into his failing logistics ventures. But I said nothing. It sounds complicated, I said, playing the part they expected. The simpleton, the fearful girl who did not understand high finance. It is complicated, Raymond said, leaning back in his chair. That is why you leave the heavy lifting to me. You are good at organization, Tatum. I am sure your filing system is impeccable, but you do not understand how real assets operate. You do not understand the pressure of making a deal happen. It is not like checking a box on a form. He looked at my grandmother, his expression softening into a mask of dutiful concern. Mom needs proper care, he said, his voice dropping an octave to simulate intimacy. This house is too big for her. The upkeep alone is a nightmare. And that land, it is a liability. If someone trips on that property, we get sued. We lose everything. I am trying to protect her. I am trying to protect all of us. I like the lake, Grandma Evelyn whispered. It was the first time she had spoken all night. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. Raymond sighed, the sound of a patient parent dealing with a toddler. I know you do, Mom, but we have to be realistic. We have to be smart. We did this legally. Remember, we talked about the power of attorney. We talked about simplifying things so you do not have to worry. He reached out and patted her withered hand. Evelyn pulled her hand away, a reflex that was so subtle I might have missed it if I had not been watching her closely for the last 10 years. I do not remember, she said softly. That is okay, Raymond said, his voice tightening just a fraction. That is why I am here to remember for you to handle the details so you can rest. He looked back at me, his eyes daring me to challenge him. He wanted me to speak up. He wanted me to ask about the power of attorney. He wanted me to ask about the developer if I engaged. He could crush me with jargon and condescension. He could paint me as the ungrateful niece who was trying to interfere with his noble efforts to save the family fortune. So I did the one thing that drove him crazy. I stayed silent. I cut a small piece of roast beef and put it in my mouth. I chewed slowly. The silence stretched out, becoming thin and brittle. My cousin shifted in his seat. My aunt cleared her throat. Raymond stared at me for 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 7 seconds. He was waiting for the capitulation. He was waiting for me to nod and agree that he was the savior of the Harrington name. I swallowed. I wiped the corner of my mouth with my napkin. Then I looked at him and offered a small, polite smile. The roast beef is excellent tonight, Uncle Raymond, I said. He blinked. The wind went out of his sails. He let out a sharp huff of breath and turned back to his meal, slicing his meat with unnecessary violence. Glad you like it, he muttered. At least someone appreciates the quality of food this family provides. The conversation moved on. They talked about the country club fees increasing by 15%. They talked about the new Mercedes S-Class my aunt wanted. They talked about a charity gala where the tickets cost $500 a plate. They measured their lives in these numbers, throwing them around like confetti, but my mind was elsewhere. Raymond thought my job at the courthouse was just stamping forms. He thought I was a clerk. He did not know that before I took the job at Ashford County, I had spent 6 years as a forensic data analyst for a private firm in Chicago. He did not know that my administrative role gave me access to the back end of the county's digitization project. He did not know that I spent my lunch breaks auditing public records for inconsistencies, or that I had a side business verifying notary logs for title companies. He saw a girl who filed papers. He did not realize that papers were the deadliest weapon in the modern world. I watched him drink his wine. He looked confident. He looked untouchable. He had the suit, the car, and the loud voice. He had convinced the entire family that he was the only one capable of steering the ship. But I noticed things he thought were hidden. I noticed the slight tremor in his hand when he wasn't holding a fork. I noticed the way he checked his phone every 4 minutes, his eyes darting to the screen with a desperation that smelled like debt. Raymond was not a savior. He was a man drowning, and he was looking for a life raft made of lakefront soil. The dinner wound down. Dessert was a lemon tart that tasted like pure sugar. I declined coffee. I wanted to get out of there. The air in the house was suffocating me. I stood up to help clear the table. Another role I was expected to play. The beautiful niece. Leave it, Raymond said, waving a hand. The help will get it tomorrow. Come sit in the living room. I want to show you the brochures for the assisted living facility I found for Mom. It is top tier, 5 stars. I really should get going, I said. I have an early start tomorrow. Always the worker bee, Raymond scoffed. Fine, go. But do not complain when you are left out of the loop on the big decisions. Cannot hold your hand forever. Tatum, I understand, I said. Good night, Uncle Raymond. Good night, Grandma. I walked over to Evelyn and kissed her cheek. Her skin felt cold. She smelled of lavender and something older, something fading. She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for a second, then let go. She looked at me, her eyes clearing for a brief, terrifying moment. Watch him, she whispered. It was so quiet I barely heard it. I nodded just a fraction of an inch. I walked out of the dining room down the long hallway lined with portraits of Harringtons who had been dead for 50 years. I grabbed my coat and my purse. I stepped out into the cool night air, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me. My sedan was parked next to Raymond's massive black SUV. The contrast was laughable. His car looked like a tank designed to crush anything in its path. Mine looked like something you used to get groceries. I got into my car and locked the doors. The silence of the vehicle was a relief. I took a deep breath, letting the tension drain out of my shoulders. I was about to start the engine when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a single vibration, sharp, urgent. I pulled the phone out. The screen was bright in the darkness of the car. It was a text message from a number I had saved simply as L. Lydia, the night nurse who cared for my grandmother on weekends. The one person in that house Raymond treated like furniture, which meant she saw everything. He thought no one was watching. I opened the message. He made her sign the papers 20 minutes before dinner. He told her it was for the insurance. Raymond took the folder with him. He is heading to a notary in the morning. I stared at the screen. The white letters glowed against the black background. My heart rate did not spike. My hands did not shake. Instead, a cold crystalline focus settled over me. Raymond had made his move. He thought he had won because he had a signature on a piece of paper. He thought legal meant having a document that looked right on the surface. I looked back at the house. The lights were on in the living room. I could see Raymond's silhouette moving past the window, a glass of brandy in his hand, probably toasting to his own brilliance. He had no idea. I put the phone down in the cup holder and started the car. The engine hummed to life. I did not drive away immediately. I sat there for 1 minute watching the house. "Okay, Uncle Ray," I said to the empty car. "You want to play the paper game? Let's play." I shifted the car into reverse and backed out of the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires. The war had officially begun, and Raymond Harrington had just fired the first shot at a ghost. He thought I was just the niece who kept the files. He was about to find out that I was the one who knew how to read the metadata. I drove toward the highway, the city lights of Ashford twinkling in the distance. Tomorrow I would not just be going to work. I would be going to war. And unlike Raymond, I did not need to shout to be heard. I just needed to be right. He said he did it legally. I smiled in the darkness. We would see about that. Grandma Evelyn passed away on a Tuesday morning, just 3 days after that suffocating dinner. The end was quiet, a stark contrast to the noise that immediately followed. By Wednesday afternoon, the grief in the Harrington household had already curdled into something that looked suspiciously like inventory management. The funeral took place on a gray, drizzly Saturday. The service was held at the most expensive chapel in Ashford, a place with velvet walls and a sound system that made the organ music vibrate in your chest. The room smelled of wet wool, lees, and expensive cologne. I stood near the back, watching the sea of black coats. It was a full house, which would have pleased my grandmother, though I suspected half the people were there to see who would inherit the lake house rather than to say goodbye to the woman who owned it. My Uncle Raymond stood at the front of the room near the casket. He was playing the role of the grieving son with the same performative energy he used to close business deals. He shook hands with a firm, two-handed grip. He nodded solemnly. He wiped a non-existent tear from his eye at appropriate intervals. But I watched his eyes. They were dry and darting, scanning the room, calculating who was important and who was merely filler. The atmosphere was heavy, but it was not heavy with sorrow. It was heavy with anticipation. I could hear it in the whispers during the viewing. Cousins I had not seen in 5 years were suddenly very interested in the condition of the roof on the main house. An aunt was audibly speculating about the resale value of the antique silver set. It was vultures circling, but they were wearing Prada and Brooks Brothers. I kept my head down. I wore a simple black dress and kept my hands clasped in front of me. To them, I was just Tatum, the quiet one, the one who probably did not understand the magnitude of the assets at play. I let them believe it. After the service, there was a reception at Raymond's house. The mood shifted from somber to frantic. People were drinking scotch and eating catered waitered hors d'oeuvres, and the volume of the conversation rose steadily. Raymond was in the center of the living room holding a manila folder against his chest like a shield. He never put it down. Not when he was hugging a crying relative. Not when he was accepting a casserole dish. That folder was attached to him. I was standing by the window nursing a glass of sparkling water. When Raymond caught my eye, he gave a sharp nod toward the hallway that led to his home office. It was a summons. I waited a minute before following him. I wanted to make sure people saw me go. I wanted witnesses to the timeline, even if they did not know they were witnesses yet. When I entered the study, Raymond was already sitting behind his massive oak desk. The room smelled of leather and stale cigar smoke. He did not offer me a seat. He opened the folder and spread a few papers out, but kept his hand resting heavily on top of them. "Tatum," he said, his voice dropping to that confidential, serious tone he used when he wanted to bully someone. "This has been a hard week for all of us." "Yes," I said, "it has. Mom wanted things to be simple," he continued, not looking at me, but at the papers under his hand. She was very clear about that in her final days. She did not want the family tearing each other apart over money. She wanted a smooth transition. That is why she entrusted me with the execution of her estate. She knew I had the experience to handle the heavy lifting. I am sure she did, I said neutrally. Exactly, Raymond said. Now, to keep things moving and to avoid probate tying up the assets for 18 months, which would be a disaster for the trust, I need to get some administrative things out of the way. Just standard procedure. We are trying to release some funds to cover the funeral costs and the immediate taxes. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward me. It was a document titled Acknowledgement of Receipt and Waiver of Notice. What is this? I asked, making no move to touch it. It is just a formality, Raymond said, waving his hand dismissively. It just says you acknowledge that I am handling the filing and that you have received a copy of the preliminary inventory. It saves us from having to send certified mail to every single heir for every single step. It speeds things up. I have already got your cousins to sign. You are the last one. I looked at the paper. The text was dense, single-spaced. My eyes scanned the paragraphs. It looked like standard boilerplate legal jargon. I, the undersigned, hereby acknowledge. But then my eyes caught something in the third paragraph. Raymond's thumb was resting on the page. It was a thick manicured thumb, pressing down hard enough to turn the nail bed white. It was covering the middle of a sentence. I leaned in slightly. Can you move your hand, Uncle Ray? I cannot read that part. Raymond gave a tight little laugh. It is just legal speak, Tatum. It says you agree to the appointment of the administrator. Standard stuff. We do not have time to parse every word. The lawyer needs this by 5 o'clock or we get delayed another week. He did not move his thumb. I looked closer. I could see the tops of the letters peeking out from under his skin. Consent to the immediate transfer of management rights and waiving all future claims. To my stomach dropped. This was not a receipt. This was a waiver of rights. If I signed this, I would be effectively agreeing that Raymond had total unchecked authority to move assets before the will was even read. I would be signing away my right to contest anything he did. I need to read it, I said. My voice was quiet, but it did not shake. Tatum, for Christ's sake, Raymond snapped, his mask slipping. Do not be difficult. Not today. Do you have any idea how much stress I am under? I am trying to save this family's inheritance, and you are acting like I am trying to trick you. Do you really think I would do that to my own sister's daughter? I just want to read it, I repeated. It is my job. Remember, I read documents all day. It is a habit. Raymond pulled the paper back slightly. His face flushed a dark, angry red. You know, this is exactly what Mom was afraid of. She told me you would be like this, petty, obsessed with the small print while the house burns down. The insult was designed to make me flinch, to make me feel guilty and small, so I would sign just to prove him wrong. But 10 years of working in the court system had hardened me against emotional manipulation. I knew that when someone got angry about you reading a contract, it was because there was something in the contract they did not want you to see. Send me the PDF, I said. I took a step back toward the door. Email it to me. I will look it over tonight and get it back to you. We do not have until tonight, Raymond shouted, standing up. I need it now. Then you should have given it to me yesterday, I said. Send the PDF, Ray. I am not signing anything I cannot read. I turned and walked out of the office. My heart was hammering against my ribs, loud and frantic, but my steps were slow. As I re-entered the living room, I felt the eyes of the family on me. My aunt was staring, a glass of wine halfway to her mouth. She looked from me to the open office door where Raymond was standing, looking furious. Is everything okay? She asked, her voice dripping with false concern. Fine, I said. Just paperwork. Uncle Ray is going to email it to me. Oh, Tatum, she sighed, shaking her head. Always making things harder than they need to be. Just let him handle it. He knows what is best. I did not respond. I grabbed my purse and walked out the front door. The rain had started again. A cold, miserable drizzle that soaked through my coat in seconds. I got into my car and drove. I did not go home immediately. I drove around for an hour, letting the adrenaline fade, replacing it with the cold, hard logic of my profession. Raymond was hiding something and he was in a hurry. That was a dangerous combination. When I finally got back to my apartment, it was 8 o'clock at night. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I sat down at my desk and booted up my computer. My apartment was small, just a one-bedroom with IKEA furniture and piles of books, but it was my sanctuary. Here I had access to the truth. I did not wait for Raymond's email. I knew it would never come, or if it did, it would be a doctored version of what he had tried to make me sign. Instead, I opened my browser and navigated to the county clerk's public records portal. I logged in with my personal account. It was a public system, but you had to know how to search it. Most people just searched by name. I searched by parcel number. I typed in the identifier for the lakefront property. Parcel ID 04122 Lake. The system churned for a moment. The little spinning wheel on the screen felt like a countdown. The results popped up. My breath hitched. There was a new filing. It was a deed. A quitclaim deed, to be precise. It had been recorded 9 days ago. 9 days before Grandma Evelyn died. I clicked on the document image. The PDF loaded slowly, line by line. Grantor Evelyn Marie Harrington, Grante Raymond J. Harrington. My eyes scanned the document. It was a transfer of the lake property, the entire estate, the house, the land, the water rights, transferred to Raymond for the sum of $10 and other good and valuable consideration. $10. He had bought a $2 million property for the price of a sandwich. I scrolled down to the signature page. There was my grandmother's signature, Evelyn M. Harrington. It looked shaky, spidery. It looked like her handwriting, but wrong. It was too small, too condensed. Then I looked at the notary block. State of Nevada, County of Clark. I frowned. Nevada. Grandma. Evelyn had not left her bed in 3 months, let alone the state. She lived in Ashford. She died in Ashford. Why was this document notarized in Nevada? I looked at the notary stamp. Sarah Jenkins. Commission expires May 2026. I pulled up a separate tab and searched for the notary. Sarah Jenkins, Las Vegas. I found her business listing. It was a 24-hour drive-through wedding chapel and notary service on the Strip. Raymond had supposedly taken my bedridden dying grandmother to a drive-through notary in Las Vegas 9 days before she died. It was impossible. It was a lie. A sloppy, arrogant lie. But then I looked at the recording stamp again. The document had been electronically filed. E-recording is common now. You scan the document, upload it, and the clerk records it. I downloaded the file. I did not just look at the image. I opened my analysis software, the tools I used for my side business, verifying digital chains of custody. I dragged the PDF into the analyzer. I wanted to see the metadata. Metadata is the digital fingerprint of a file. It tells you things the image does not. It tells you when a file was created, when it was modified, and sometimes whose computer it came from. The analysis ran. A stream of data filled the right side of my screen. Creation date, October 4th. Modification date, October 12th. I froze. The document was recorded on October 4th. The county stamp was clear, but the metadata said the file was modified on October 12th. Grandma died on October 13th. If the document was recorded and locked in the county system on the 4th, how could the file have a modification date of the 12th once a document is recorded? It is a permanent public record. Cannot be changed. The version in the system should be static unless the version I was looking at was not the original scan or unless someone had access to the recording system and swapped the file. I leaned back in my chair, the light from the monitor washing over my face. The room was silent, save for the hum of the computer fan. Raymond had said, "We did this legally." He had said it so many times. He believed that because a piece of paper had a stamp on it, it was bulletproof. He thought the stamp was the end of the story. He did not know that digital files talk. I looked at the signature again. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. "If you really signed this, Grandma?" I whispered to the empty room. "Why does the digital timestamp say you signed it 3 days after the document was supposedly notarized?" The metadata showed the signature field was flattened into the PDF on October 7th. The notary stamp was dated October 1st. The timeline was a mess. The geography was impossible. The file history was contradictory. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was fraud. And not just simple fraud. This was a sophisticated attempt to manufacture a reality that never happened. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Raymond. "Stop playing games, Tatum. I expect that signature tomorrow morning. Do not make me come down to the courthouse." I stared at the message. He was trying to scare me. He was trying to use his physical presence, his loud voice, his position as the patriarch to crush me. He had no idea what I was looking at. I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the metadata report. I saved the deed to 3 different encrypted cloud drives. I printed a hard copy and locked it in my fireproof box. Then I sat there in the dark, watching the cursor blink, the grief I had been holding back. The sadness for my grandmother was still there, sitting heavy in my chest. But now it was wrapped in something else. Cold, hard anger. Raymond had stolen her legacy while she was taking her last breaths. He had used her name, her hand, her trust to rob the family he claimed to be saving. "You want to come to the courthouse, Ray?" I said softly. I looked at the Nevada notary stamp one last time. "Be my guest." I closed the laptop. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, mapping out the next steps. I needed more than just a suspicious PDF. I needed the source. I needed to know how he got that deed into the system. And I needed to know who helped him. Because if there was one thing I knew about Raymond, he was not smart enough to do this alone. He had help. And whoever helped him had left a trail. The funeral was over. The mourning period was finished. Now the audit began. The week following the funeral was an exercise in territorial conquest. If the dinner table had been a battlefield, my grandmother's house was now occupied territory. Raymond did not wait for the legal cooling-off period. He did not wait for the grass to grow back over the grave. He moved in with the entitlement of a king reclaiming a castle he had never actually built. I drove over to the house on a Wednesday afternoon to pick up a box of old photo albums Grandma had promised me years ago. I found the front door unlocked. Inside, the air no longer smelled of lavender and old paper. It smelled of industrial cleaner and Raymond's heavy cologne. He was in the living room directing 2 movers who were hauling my grandmother's floral sofa out the back door. "Careful with the door frame," Raymond shouted, pointing a finger that looked more like a weapon than a limb. He turned and saw me standing in the foyer. He did not look guilty. He looked annoyed that I had interrupted his renovation. "Tatum," he said, checking his watch. "I thought you were working. Do the taxpayers know you are taking midday field trips?" "I am on my lunch break." I lied. I had taken the afternoon off, but he did not need to know that. "What are you doing with the furniture?" "Clearing the clutter," Raymond said, taking a set of keys out of his pocket. Grandma's keys and tossing them into the air. He caught them with a sharp snap. "We need to stage the place if we are going to get it appraised." Nobody buys a house that looks like a museum for the 1950s. The will hasn't been read. Raymond, I said, keeping my voice level. You do not have the authority to liquidate the contents yet. He laughed. It was a genuine belly-shaking laugh that made my skin crawl. Sweetheart, he said, walking over and patting me on the shoulder. It took everything in me not to recoil. You really do not listen, do you? The deed is done. The transfer is recorded. This is my house now. I'm just doing the family a favor by getting it ready for the market. Someone has to do the heavy lifting. My Aunt Linda walked in from the kitchen holding a stack of Grandma's porcelain plates. She looked at me with a pitying smile. Tatum, honey, she said, why don't you go make us some coffee? Raymond has been working so hard. Leave the business decisions to the men. Real estate is a rough game. You do not want to get your hands dirty. Connie said the same thing. Raymond added, referencing my other aunt. Girls should not get mixed up in land deals. It is too much stress. You stick to your filing cabinets at the courthouse. Let me worry about the assets. I looked at them. They stood there surrounded by the physical dismantling of a life that had lasted 89 years, and they felt absolutely justified. They saw a woman who drove a sedan with a dent in the bumper and wore off-the-rack blazers. They saw a failure. They saw a niece who had gone to the big city, failed to launch, and came crawling back to a safe, low-paying government job. It was the greatest advantage I had. They did not know the truth. They did not know that I had not left Chicago because I failed. I left because I was exhausted by the victory 7 years ago. I was not a clerk. I was a senior forensic data specialist for Meridian Docket Works, a private firm that contracted with federal agencies to audit large-scale bankruptcy fraud. I spent 12 hours a day hunting for hidden assets in terabytes of corporate data. I had a certified fraud examiner credential framed on my wall and a salary that put me in the top 5% of earners for my age bracket. But the work was soulless. It was high pressure, high stakes, and it ate my life. When my grandmother got sick the first time, I used it as an excuse to exit. I moved back to Ashford, took a job at the county court that offered full benefits and zero overtime, and told everyone I just wanted a simpler life. What I never told them was that I kept the skills and I kept the clients. I lived in a small apartment and drove an old car because I preferred it, not because I had to. Under the name TH Consulting, I ran a boutique service verifying notary logs and digital chain of custody for title insurance companies. I worked 10 hours a week from my laptop and made more than Raymond did in a month of his failing logistics schemes. I was not poor. I was undercover. I will pass on the coffee, I said to Aunt Linda. I just came for the photo albums. Oh, those old things. Raymond waved a hand toward a pile of boxes near the trash. Take them, less for the movers to carry. I grabbed the box. It felt heavy in my arms, grounded and real. I walked out without saying goodbye. As I reached the door, I heard Raymond say to the movers, "Get the dining table next. It is worth at least $4,000. I drove straight home. I did not go back to work. I had a different kind of work to do. I set up my workspace on my dining table. This was not the chaotic scattering of papers Raymond was used to. This was a surgical theater. I opened my laptop and connected to my secure server. I had the acknowledgement Raymond tried to make me sign. I had the downloaded deed with the contradictory metadata. Now I needed to build the map. In fraud investigation, we call it the life of the record. Every digital document has a birth, a life, and a death. If the story the metadata tells does not match the story the human tells, the human is lying always. I pinned the printed deed to a corkboard I kept for cases. I started writing on index cards. Point A, the creation. The metadata said the file was created on October 4th. Point B, the notary Sarah Jenkins in Las Vegas. Point C, the recording. The Ashford County Recorder Office. I logged into the county system using my employee credentials. I was not supposed to use them for personal matters, but I was not looking at the file itself anymore. I was looking at the system logs. I had access to the back-end interface that showed who processed the filings. I typed in the recording number of the deed. The system showed the intake log. Received October 4th, 2:15 in the afternoon. Source e-recording portal processed by clerk ID 8842. I stared at the ID number 8842. In a county court, every clerk has a unique 4-digit identifier. It is like a digital fingerprint. When a document comes in electronically, a human clerk has to open it, verify it meets the formatting standards, and hit accept. That action stamps the document into the public record. I knew most of the IDs. I knew mine was 9001. I knew the head clerk was 7720. I did not recognize 8842. I pulled up the HR directory. It was a simple spreadsheet available to all administrative staff. I hit Control F and typed in the number. The result highlighted in yellow. ID 8842. Name Miller. James. Status inactive. My heart skipped a beat. James Miller, old Jimmy. He was a sweet man who used to bring donuts on Fridays. He had worked in the recording division for 30 years. He had also died of a heart attack in his garage 11 months ago. I sat back in my chair. The silence of the room suddenly deafening. A dead man had accepted Raymond's deed. Got you, I whispered. This was the crack in the dam. This was not just a forged signature or a shady notary. This was internal tampering. Someone had used Jimmy's old login credentials to bypass the current active clerks. Why use a dead man's login? Because active clerks are monitored. We have performance metrics. We have supervisors checking our queues, but an inactive account that is a ghost in the machine. It flies under the radar. It implies that someone on the inside or someone who hacked the inside had reactivated that ID just long enough to push the specific document through. I looked at the timestamp again. October 4th. On October 4th, the recording office had been closed for Columbus Day. It was a federal holiday. No one was in the building. The server would accept automatic uploads, but no human should have been there to process it. So Raymond or his lawyer or whoever he hired had uploaded the deed, and someone with access to the county system had logged in as a dead man on a federal holiday to approve it. I went deeper. I ran a query on ID 8842 for the entire year. 0 activity for 10 months. Then on October 4th, a burst of activity. 3 documents processed in 6 minutes. One was Raymond's deed. The other 2 were dummy filings, corrections to old typos on unrelated properties, likely done to make the login look like it was doing cleanup work if anyone glanced at the logs. I took a screenshot, then another. I built a folder named Project Harrington. I had enough. I did not need to know who physically pressed the button yet. I just needed to prove that the button was pressed by a ghost. I opened my email client. I did not use my work email. I used my secure consulting email, the one with the encryption keys. I typed the subject line, Notice of Dispute, Preservation of Assets, Estate of Evelyn Harrington. I attached the PDF of the deed, but not the metadata report. I wanted to show them the gun, not the bullets. I drafted the body of the email, kept it cold. I stripped every ounce of niece out of my voice to Raymond Harrington, legal counsel. This correspondence serves as formal notice that the validity of the quit-claim deed recorded on October 4th regarding the property at Purcell ID 041922 is being contested. Preliminary audits of the recording metadata indicate significant irregularities regarding the chain of custody and the authentication of the filing. Furthermore, evidence suggests the document was processed using the credentials of a deceased court employee during a federal holiday. Demand is hereby made to immediately cease all liquidation efforts, transfer of assets, or structural alterations to the property. Failure to preserve the status quo will be viewed as spoliation of evidence. I have retained copies of the relevant digital logs. Govern yourselves accordingly. Tatum Henderson. I hovered my finger over the send button. I thought about Raymond in the living room, tossing the keys in the air. I thought about Aunt Linda telling me to go make coffee. I thought about the way they looked at me like I was furniture. I clicked send. The message swooshed away. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine. I did not have to wait long. 11 minutes later, my phone rang. It was not a text this time. It was Raymond. I let it ring 3 times for times. I picked up on the 5th ring just before it went to voicemail. Hello, I said, my voice calm, casual. What the hell is this? Raymond's voice was a low growl. He sounded breathless, like he had been running. I just got an email. Did you write this? I did. I said, what is this garbage about a deceased employee? He demanded. Are you on drugs? You are accusing me of what hacking? I am not accusing you of anything yet. Raymond, I said, leaning against the counter. I am just pointing out that the clerk who stamped your deed has been dead for a year. That is a problem for the chain of title. No title company will insure a sale with that kind of defect. You cannot sell the land. Silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end. The bluster was hitting a wall. He had expected me to cry about fairness or grandma's wishes. He had expected an emotional plea. He was not ready for a procedural blockade. You are making a mistake, he said. But the volume was lower now. The arrogance was replaced by something sharper. Caution. You are playing with things you do not understand. My lawyers vetted everything. Then your lawyers should explain how they resurrected James Miller on Columbus Day. I said, I am just the filing girl. Remember, I just look at the records. Tatum, he said. The tone shifted. It was the tone of a man checking to see if his safety belt was fastened. We need to talk. Not over the phone. Come by the house tomorrow. We can work something out. No, I said, I do not think I will. And Raymond, what? Put the sofa back. I hung up the phone. My hand was trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the rush of the first hit. I had drawn blood. Raymond had shifted from offense to defense in the span of a single email. He knew I had seen something he thought was invisible, but he did not know the half of it. He thought this was a clerical error he could smooth over with a bribe or a threat. He did not realize that by using a dead man's login, he had turned a civil dispute into a federal crime. I looked at the corkboard. The index card with James Miller on it seemed to glow under the desk lamp. The war was on, and for the first time in the history of the Harrington family, the weapons were not money or shouting. The weapons were zeros and ones, and I owned the code. The summons came on Sunday morning, not via a polite phone call, but through a group text message that included every living relative within a 50 miles radius. The message was brief. Family meeting 1 o'clock, attendance mandatory. We need to address the threats against the estate. I knew exactly what this was. It was not a meeting. It was a tribunal. I arrived at my grandmother's house at exactly 1 o'clock. The driveway was already full. Raymond's black SUV was parked aggressively near the front steps, flanked by the more modest sedans of my aunts and cousins. But there was one car I did not recognize. A silver German sedan with tinted windows parked in the spot usually reserved for the hospice nurse. When I walked into the living room, the air was so thick with tension it felt physical, like walking into a wall of humidity. My family was arranged in a semicircle around the fireplace. Raymond stood by the mantel, his chest puffed out, sitting in the wing-back chair. My grandmother's favorite chair was a man I had never met. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my car, and he had a briefcase resting by his feet. "She is here," my Aunt Connie announced, her voice dripping with disapproval. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, clutching her purse as if I might try to snatch it. "Come in, Tatum," Raymond said. His voice was calm, almost sad. It was a performance. "Have a seat. We have a lot to get through." I remained standing near the archway. "I am fine right here, Raymond. Who is your friend?" "This is Mr. Sterling," Raymond said, gesturing to the man in the suit. "He is the estate's legal counsel. I thought it was necessary to bring him in given the disturbing allegations you have been making." Mr. Sterling stood up and buttoned his jacket. He gave me a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Ms. Henderson, a pleasure. Your uncle has told me quite a bit about your interest in the proceedings." "I am sure he has," I said. Raymond stepped forward, clasping his hands behind his back. He looked at the family, making eye contact with each of them before landing his gaze on me. "I called everyone here because we have a crisis," Raymond began. "As you all know, Mom entrusted me with the heavy burden of managing her affairs. I have spent years really sacrificing my own time and business interests to ensure this family is protected, to ensure our legacy survives." He paused for effect. My cousin Brad nodded solemnly. Brad owed Raymond money for a failed sports bar venture, so his loyalty was purchased at a high interest rate. But now, Raymond continued, his voice hardening. "We have a problem. Tatum has decided to attack me. She has sent threatening emails. She is accusing this family of fraud. She is claiming that the documents Mom signed are fake. She is trying to freeze the assets that we need to pay for the funeral, for the taxes, for everything." A murmur went through the room. My Aunt Linda shook her head, looking at me with genuine disappointment. "Oh, Tatum, how could you?" "I am not attacking the family," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rapid thumping of my heart. "I am questioning the timeline. I am questioning how a deed was recorded on a federal holiday by a dead clerk." "Technicalities," Raymond shouted, his composure cracking for a split second before he reined it in. "See, this is what she does. She works in a basement at the courthouse and thinks she is a lawyer. She gets obsessed with computer glitches and ignores the reality." Mr. Sterling stepped in, his voice smooth and authoritative. "Ms. Henderson, electronic recording systems are often subject to batch processing errors. A timestamp anomaly is hardly evidence of fraud. What matters is the intent of the gurtor. And we have the documents." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out 2 crisp stacks of paper. He laid them on the coffee table with a heavy thud. "The quitclaim deed," Sterling said, tapping the first stack. "And the durable power of attorney. Both signed by Evelyn Harrington. Both notarized, both legal." "We did this legally," Raymond echoed, looking at his sisters. "Mom sat right there at that dining table and told me to handle it. She said, 'Raymond, take care of the house. Don't let the government take it.' I am just doing what she asked. She is trying to make us look bad." Aunt Connie spat out. She turned to me, her face pinched. "You always do this, Tatum. You always have to be the smartest person in the room. You were like this as a kid, too. Always reading, always correcting people. It is ugly. You are jealous because Grandma didn't leave you in charge." "I am not jealous, Aunt Connie," I said. "I am worried you are all being robbed." "Robbed?" Raymond laughed. "I am the one putting money into this estate. I am the one dealing with the developers. If you keep this up, Tatum, if you file any lawsuits, if you drag this family into court, I will make sure you are cut off completely. You will not see a dime, and everyone in this room will know that you are the reason their inheritance is tied up for years." The thread hung in the air. It was effective. I saw the fear in my cousin's eyes. They wanted their payouts. They did not care about the truth. They cared about the timeline of the wire transfer. I walked over to the coffee table. Mr. Sterling tensed as if I were going to grab the papers and run. I just looked down at them. There was the signature I had analyzed on my screen. It looked even worse in person. The ink was too uniform. I looked up at Raymond. I decided to test him. I needed to see if he was the architect or just the beneficiary. The notary, I said. Raymond blinked. What the notary? I repeated. Sarah Jenkins. You said you took Grandma to see her. You said it was a drive-through place in Las Vegas. That is a long trip for a dying woman. Raymond, do you remember what she looked like, Ms. Jenkins? Raymond answered immediately. She was a blonde, older woman, very professional. We flew out private, signed the papers, and came back the same day. Mom wanted one last trip. He said it without hesitation. It was a rehearsed line. He had memorized the script. Blonde, I said flatly. And you went to her office? Yes, Raymond said, crossing his arms. Is the interrogation over? I looked down at the deed again. I did not tell him that I had looked up Sarah Jenkins's social media profile the night before. Sarah Jenkins was a 24-year-old brunette who worked out of a kiosk in a strip mall, but I did not play that card yet. I looked at the document structure. Where is Exhibit A? I asked. Mr. Sterling shifted his weight. Excuse me. The legal description, I said, pointing to the deed. A quick claim deed for a property this size requires a meets and bounds description attached as Exhibit A. This document references it, but it is not attached without the full legal description. The county recorder should have rejected it automatically. I turned to the power of attorney. And this, I said, this is a springing power of attorney. It only becomes active upon the incapacitation of the principal. That requires a letter from 2 attending physicians certifying that Grandma was not of sound mind. Where are the doctor's letters? The room went silent. The family did not understand what I was saying, but they understood the tone. They understood that I was pointing out holes in the boat they were all sailing on. We have the letters, Raymond snapped. They are in the file. Show them, I said. I do not have to show you anything, Raymond roared. His face was turning a dangerous shade of purple. You are nobody. You are a clerk. You are not an heir to the decision-making process. It does not matter, Mr. Sterling interrupted, his voice cutting through the noise. He looked at me with a smirk that chilled my blood. Your procedural nitpicking is irrelevant, Ms. Henderson. It is not irrelevant if the transfer is void, I said. It is irrelevant, Raymond said, a cruel smile spreading across his face, because the property is gone. I froze. What did you say? Raymond walked over to the sideboard and poured himself a glass of water, taking his time. He wanted this moment. I sold it, he said. The lakefront property. I sold it 2 days ago. The deal closed this morning. You cannot sell it, I said, my voice dropping. We are in a dispute period. I sent you a notice. Your email means nothing, Raymond said. We had a willing buyer, a cash buyer. They did not care about your little email. They wanted the land. The wire hit the estate account an hour ago. For $0.5 million. He looked around the room, spreading his arms wide. Did you hear that? Everyone, for $0.5 million. That is what I just brought to this family. And Tatum here is trying to tell you that I did it wrong. My cousins gasped. Aunt Connie put a hand to her chest. The number dazzled them. It blinded them. They looked at Raymond like he was a god. Who is the buyer? I asked. I felt sick. A holding company, Mr. Sterling said smoothly. Vidian Ventures LLC. A perfectly legitimate investment group. Vidian Ventures, I repeated. The name sounded generic, sterile, like a shell. The money is in the bank, Raymond said, pointing a finger at me. It is done. You cannot undo a sale to a third party once the funds have cleared. It is over, Tatum. So, you can take your conspiracy theories and get out of my house. It is not your house, I said. It is now, he replied. I have the deed to this one. 2. Do you want to check the margins on that one? I looked at my family. They were not looking at me anymore. They were looking at Raymond, imagining the checks he was about to write them. They were complicit now. Their greed had been weaponized against the truth. You sold it to a shell company, I said, realizing the play. Let me guess. You are going to develop it yourself, aren't you? Vidian Ventures isn't a third party. It is you. Careful, Mr. Sterling warned. That is slander. It is only slander if it is false, I said. I turned to leave. There was no point in arguing with people who were drunk on the promise of millions. I had to get out. I had to get to a computer. I had to find out who owned Vidian Ventures. As I opened the front door, a man in a windbreaker was walking up the steps. He held a stack of papers. Tat Henderson, he asked. I stopped. Yes, you have been served, he said. Thrusting the papers into my hand, I looked down at the cover sheet. Superior Court of Ashford County Plaintiff, the estate of Evelyn Harrington. Defendant Tatum Henderson, motion for temporary restraining order and complaint for torturous interference. I read the first paragraph. Raymond was suing me. He was accusing me of harassment, of attempting to defraud the estate, and of causing irreparable harm to the family's financial standing. He was asking the court to bar me from accessing any estate records or contacting any family members. I looked back into the house. Raymond was standing in the hallway watching me. He raised his glass in a mock toast. Hooray for the legal system, he mouthed. I walked to my car, my hands shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. He had used the law as a shield. He had sold the land to bury the evidence. He had turned the family against me. And now he was using the court, my court, the place where I worked, to silence me. I threw the lawsuit onto the passenger seat. You want to sue me, Raymond? I said to the windshield, tears of rage stinging my eyes. Fine, you just put this on the docket. That means we get discovery. He thought the lawsuit was a wall to keep me out. He did not realize he had just opened the door to the one place where I had more power than he did. I started the car and reversed out of the driveway. I was not going home. I was going to the office. It was Sunday, but my badge still worked. I needed to find out who was behind Vidian Ventures. And I had a feeling the answer was going to be the key to burning Raymond's entire kingdom to the ground. He said the money was safe. He said no one could reverse it. He was wrong. The lawsuit Raymond threw at me was meant to be a cage. He thought a restraining order and a tortious interference claim would frighten me into silence, forcing me to retreat to my cubicle and accept defeat. He forgot that a lawsuit is not just a weapon for the plaintiff. It is a key that unlocks the door to discovery by suing me. He had given me the legal standing to demand answers. I did not sleep Sunday night. I spent the hours between midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning drafting my response. I did not need a lawyer yet. I knew the formatting rules for the Superior Court of Ashford County better than most of the associates at Mr. Sterling's firm. I drafted an ex parte application for a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction. My argument was simple and devastating: dissipation of assets. I argued that the rapid sale of the lakefront property to a shell company controlled by the executive combined with the suspicious timing of the deed recording constituted an immediate threat to the estate. I filed the papers at 8 in the morning on Monday. The clerk at the window, a woman named Sarah, who I had eaten lunch with for 5 years, looked at the name on the file and then at me. "You are going after Raymond," she whispered, stamping the date on the cover sheet. "I am going after the truth, Sarah." I said, "Process it, please." By 10 o'clock, the judge had granted a temporary freeze on the remaining assets pending a hearing. It was a small victory, a tourniquet on a bleeding wound, but it bought me time, and time was exactly what Raymond did not want me to have. With the legal shield in place, I went on the offensive. My first target was the notary, Sarah Jenkins. Raymond claimed they had flown to Las Vegas to sign the papers on October 1st. He claimed they went to her office. It was a neat story, but neat stories often fall apart when you look at the calendar. I spent $300 to access a private database of professional notary associations. I ran a search for Sarah Jenkins. I found her LinkedIn profile, her business registration, and her continuing education log. Then I found her Instagram. It was public. People who commit fraud should really learn to set their accounts to private. On October 1st, the day my bedridden grandmother was supposedly in a strip mall in Las Vegas signing away her legacy, Sarah Jenkins was not in Nevada. She was posting selfies from the National Notary Association annual conference in Orlando, Florida. I scrolled through the feed. There she was, wearing Mickey Mouse ears, holding a cocktail, tagged at a hotel in Disney World. The timestamp was clear. October 1st, 4:30 in the afternoon. I captured the entire feed using a preservation tool that hashes the data so it holds up in court. Raymond's witness was 2,000 m away riding a roller coaster while she was allegedly witnessing my grandmother's signature. I added the screenshots to my evidence map. Exhibit C, the alibi. Next, I went after the physical reality of the signing. Raymond had mentioned a private flight and a drive-through or office visit, depending on which lie he was telling at the moment. I focused on the strip mall in Las Vegas where Sarah Jenkins' business was registered. I did not have subpoena power in Nevada yet, but I had something else. I had the ability to sound like an insurance adjuster. I called the property management company that owned the strip mall. "This is Tatum Henderson from Claims," I said, my voice bored and bureaucratic. "We have a liability incident reported in your parking lot on October 1st. A vehicle incident involving a black SUV. We need to verify if the vehicle was on the premises to process the payout. Do you retain security footage for 30 days? We keep it for 60, the manager grunted. "What time?" "Between noon and 4, I said. "I am looking for a black SUV, 2 passengers, an elderly woman in a wheelchair, and a middle-aged man." The manager sent me a link to a cloud folder. 2 hours later, I downloaded the footage. My heart pounded as I scrubbed through the hours of grainy video. At 2:14 in the afternoon, a black SUV pulled into the lot. My breath caught. It was a rental. I could see the barcode sticker on the window. The driver's door opened. Raymond stepped out. He was wearing the same suit he wore to the funeral. He looked around, checked his phone, and walked toward the notary kiosk. He was alone. I watched the passenger door. I waited for him to come around and help my grandmother out. I waited for the wheelchair. I waited for any sign of Evelyn Harrington. The door never opened. Raymond went into the shop. He came out 9 minutes later holding a folder. He got back into the car and drove away. My grandmother was never there. She was not in the car. She was not in Las Vegas. She was dying in her bed in Ashford while Raymond took a folder of papers to a notary's assistant who likely stamped them without asking questions. Or perhaps he met someone else entirely who was covering for Sarah. It did not matter. The footage proved the grantor was not present. That made the deed void abio from the beginning. I saved the video file. Exhibit D, the ghost. But I needed more. I needed to prove the intent. I needed to show that Raymond was not just opportunistic but predatory. I turned my attention to the communication logs. During the family meeting, I had noticed Raymond's phone was connected to the house Wi-Fi. My grandmother's iPad was also on that network. I had the passwords because I had set the network up for her 3 years ago. I did not hack Raymond. I accessed the backup of my grandmother's iCloud account, which I was legally authorized to manage as the executive of her digital legacy. A small document she had signed 5 years ago that Raymond had forgotten about. The backup contained her iMessage history. I scrolled back to September. The messages were heartbreaking. They were mostly one way. My grandmother asking where Raymond was, asking why I had not visited. Then I saw the thread with Lydia, the caregiver. Raymond to Lydia, September 28th. Make sure she takes the sedative by 6. I have people coming over to appraise the furniture. I do not want her confused. Lydia to Raymond, September 29th. She is asking for Tatum. She wants to call her. Raymond to Lydia, September 29th. No, don't let Tatum see her. Tell Mom that Tatum is busy with work. Take the phone away if you have to. We are in a sensitive phase with the estate planning. No outside interference. Don't let Tatum see her. I stared at the screen, tears blurring my vision. He had isolated her. He had drugged her. He had lied to her about me. I remembered the weeks leading up to her death. How every time I called, Lydia said Grandma was sleeping. Every time I drove by, Raymond's car was in the driveway and the door was locked. I had thought it was just bad timing. It was a blockade. I exported the chat logs. Exhibit E. Undue influence. But the final nail in the coffin came from a source I had almost overlooked. I was going through the old filing cabinet in my apartment looking for my own birth certificate when I found a folder labeled Legal Consult 2018. I opened it. Inside was a USB drive. I remembered now. Grandma had asked me to drive her to a boutique estate attorney in the city 4 years ago, long before she got sick. She wanted to ask questions about trusts. The attorney had recorded the session for his notes and given her a copy. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. The file was an MP3. I put on my headphones and pressed play. Grandma's voice filled my ears. It was strong then clear. I know Raymond thinks he is a businessman, she said on the recording. I could hear the smile in her voice. But he gambles. He gambles with things that do not belong to him. I do not want him to have the lake house. He will sell it to pay off his debts. That house is for Tatum. She is the only one who loves the land for what it is, not what it is worth, the lawyer's voice asked. Do you want to codify that in a will today? Not today, Grandma replied. I need to talk to him first. I want to give him a chance to do the right thing. But if anything happens, I want it known the house is Tatum's. She had never signed the will that day. But the recording was a testament to her state of mind. It directly contradicted Raymond's narrative that she begged him to take the property. It established his motive and her fear. I had the alibi. I had the video. I had the texts. I had the voice. Now I needed the technical kill shot. I sent the digital scan of the power of attorney, the one Raymond had flaunted at the meeting, to a forensic document examiner I knew from my days at Meridian. He was one of the best in the country. He used spectral imaging to analyze ink density and stroke vectors. His report came back in 4 hours. Subject analysis of signature on POA dated October 1st. Findings. The signature labeled Evelyn Harrington exhibits zero natural variation when overlaid with a check signed by the subject in 2019. In handwriting analysis, no person signs their name exactly the same way twice. A perfect geometric match indicates a lift, a forgery created by tracing or digitally copying an existing signature. Conclusion. The signature is a simulation. It is a forgery. I saved the report. I redacted the expert's name. I did not want Raymond or Mr. Sterling trying to bribe him or intimidate him before the hearing. I had built a fortress of evidence. I had the how, the why, and the who. I looked at my evidence map on the wall. It was no longer a theory. It was an indictment. My email pinged. It was a letter from Mr. Sterling. Ms. Henderson. We are in receipt of your frivolous ex parte application. This is your final warning. Withdraw your motion and the accompanying slanderous accusations immediately. If you proceed to the hearing, we will present evidence that you have manufactured these digital records to extort the estate. We will seek sanctions, legal fees, and criminal charges for evidence tampering. You have 24 hours to withdraw. I read the email twice. He was trying to gaslight me. He was accusing me of the very thing they had done. It was the desperate thrashing of a man who realized the water was rising faster than he could bail. I hit reply. I did not write a paragraph. I did not explain my evidence. I did not defend myself. I typed one sentence. Mr. Sterling, see you at the hearing. I hit send. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights of Ashford were blinking in the distance somewhere out there. Raymond was probably drinking scotch, telling himself he had scared me off. He thought legal meant having a lawyer with a loud voice. He was about to learn that legal meant proving it. I turned off the light in my apartment. I was ready. The trap was set. The bait was laid. And tomorrow I was going to watch him walk right into it to catch a liar. You do not need to shout the truth. You just need to hand them a lie that is prettier than the one they are currently telling and watch them grab it with both hands. Raymond was arrogant, and arrogance is a form of blindness. He was so convinced that he was the smartest man in the room that he never considered the possibility that the room itself was rigged. I needed him to testify. I needed him to put his version of events on the record in a way that he could not walk back. But we were not in court yet. So I had to bring the court to him. I drafted a dummy document. It was a notice of exhibit that I planned to file with the court. In it, I attached a copy of the quitclaim deed, but I did not attach the one I had downloaded from the county website. I opened Photoshop and carefully, subtly, degraded the image quality of the notary stamp. I introduced a small artifact, a tiny black scratch across the center of the stamp, and I blurred the commission number just enough to make it ambiguous. It looked like a bad scan. It looked like the kind of desperate, sloppy evidence a clerk would scrape together. I emailed this document to Mr. Sterling, Raymond's lawyer, with a subject line that read, "Courtesy copy Exhibit A for upcoming hearing." I accidentally copied my Aunt Linda and Cousin Brad on the email. I knew Linda checked her email every 10 minutes, and I knew she forwarded everything to Raymond. The bait was in the water. I waited. I sat in my living room, my laptop open monitoring the family group chat. Took 40 minutes. My phone lit up. It was a message from Aunt Linda. "Tatum, why are you sending these blurry papers to the lawyer? You are embarrassing us. You cannot even read the stamp." Then the shark surfaced. Raymond replied to the group text. "Typical. She is trying to build a case on a bad photocopy. This is why amateurs should not play lawyer. The deed is pristine. I have the original right here. Look at the difference." And then he did exactly what I prayed he would do. He attached a file to the group message. File final deed signed clean PDF. I did not open it on my phone. I opened it on my secure terminal. My hands were steady, but my pulse was racing. I opened the file Raymond had sent. It was beautiful, crisp. The resolution was 300 dots per inch. The signature was sharp. The notary stamp was perfect. But there was one thing missing. There was no county recording stamp. When a document is recorded, the county clerk stamps the top right corner with a book and page number, a barcode, and the date. That stamp becomes part of the image. It is flattened into the file. If you download a deed from the public record, which is the only place a legitimate third party or family member should be getting it, it must have that stamp. The file Raymond sent did not have the stamp. That meant this was not the public record. This was the source file. This was the version that existed on his computer before it was uploaded to the system. "Got you," I whispered. By sharing this file, Raymond had just proven he possessed the unrecorded original. He had proven custody of the digital asset before it entered the county chain. And when I ran the metadata on the specific file, it showed the author as J. Sterling Law. He had just linked his lawyer directly to the creation of the forged document. He thought he was proving my copy was bad. In reality, he was proving his access was privileged. I saved the file. I saved the text thread. I saved the screenshot of him bragging about it. Exhibit F, the source. Now, I had to pull the other thread, the money. Raymond had claimed he sold the property to Vidian Ventures LLC for $4.5 million. He claimed it was a done deal, a third-party transaction that could not be reversed. I pulled up the Secretary of State business search. I typed in Vidian Ventures. The result came up. Status active. Formation date September 15th. The company was formed 2 weeks before my grandmother died. I paid the $20 fee to download the articles of organization. The registered agent was a generic service company in Delaware. A common tactic to hide ownership. Most people stop there. They see corporate service company and hit a wall. But I knew how these shells were nested. I looked at the manager listed on the filing. It was not a person. It was another LLC, Apex Holdings, Group B. I searched for Apex Holdings. Its manager was another entity, Blue Water Management. I searched for Blue Water Management, and there buried in the filing for Blue Water Management was a physical address for the authorized signatory 124, Oak Street, Suite 400, Ashford. I knew that address. I had seen it on the letterhead Mr. Sterling sent me. Suite 400 was the law office of Sterling Associates. I sat back, the cold logic of the scheme laying itself out before me like a blueprint. Raymond did not sell the land to a developer. He sold it to his own lawyer. Or rather, Sterling had set up a shell company to buy the land at a price they likely set themselves, probably using Raymond's share of the estate as collateral for the loan to buy it. They were washing the asset. They would hold it in the shell company, wait for the dust to settle, and then develop it, splitting the real profits, which would be 20 or 30 million, not 4. The 4.5 million Raymond was bragging about was just enough to shut the family up. It was hush money paid with their own inheritance. I felt a surge of nausea. It was so greedy, so banal. They were stripping the carcass of my grandmother's legacy before she was even cold. But nausea does not win lawsuits. Discovery does. I opened my drafting software. I was done with the temporary restraining order. I was moving to the next phase. I drafted a motion for expedited discovery. I listed my demands. I did not ask for all documents. I was specific. Request number 1, production of the native digital file for the quitclaim deed with original metadata. Request number 2, all internal email communications between Raymond Harrington and Julian Sterling regarding Vidian Ventures or Apex Holdings. Request number 3, the transaction log for the wire transfer of $4.5 million, including the originating bank account details. I filed the motion electronically at 4 in the afternoon. I knew Sterling would fight it. He would claim attorney-client privilege. He would claim the business records were confidential, but he had a problem. He was now a party to the fraud. The moment I linked his address to the buyer, the crime-fraud exception to attorney-client privilege kicked in. You cannot claim privilege if you and your lawyer are conspiring to commit a crime. At 6 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was Raymond. A text message. I just heard from Sterling. He says you are filing harassment motions. Give it up, Tatum. The money is in the account. The family is happy. You are the only one making a scene. You lost. All of this is legal. Just walk away and I might still cut you a check for your trouble. I stared at the words. It is legal. He really believed it. He believed that because he had paid a lawyer to set up the LLCs, because he had paid a notary to stamp the paper, because he had paid a clerk to look the other way, that it was legal. He confused procedural with lawful. I did not reply. I did not need to. I had one last thing to check. The court docket had updated. The hearing for my injunction was scheduled for Thursday morning. I needed to know who would be presiding. I logged into the court calendar. I scrolled down to Thursday. Case number 24, Pro 0992. Estate of Evelyn Harrington, presiding Judge Honorable Marcus Halden. My breath caught in my throat. Judge Halden. In the courthouse, we had nicknames for all the judges. Judge Miller was the napper. Judge Garcia was the scholar. Judge Halden was the butcher. He was a former federal prosecutor who had spent 20 years taking down racketeering syndicates. He had zero tolerance for white-collar nonsense. He was known for reading every single page of the exhibits. He was known for asking questions that made seasoned litigators stutter. And most importantly, he despised lawyers who used the court system to launder dirty deals. Raymond and Sterling had drawn the worst possible card in the deck. I looked at Raymond's text again. You lost. I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was gone. It was replaced by the cold mechanical certainty of a trap springing shut. You have no idea, I said to the empty room. I printed out the judge's profile and pinned it to my board next to Raymond's picture. I packed my bag for court. I organized my exhibits. I had the fake deed, the real deed, the metadata, the video of the empty parking lot, the shell company registration, and the connection to Sterling. Raymond thought he was walking into a family dispute. He thought he could charm the judge, wave his expensive suit around, and talk about business decisions. He was walking into a federal fraud indictment wrapped in a probate hearing. I went to bed early. I wanted to be well rested. I wanted to be sharp because tomorrow Raymond was going to laugh. He was going to sit there and smile and think he had won. And I needed to be ready for the moment the smile stopped. I needed to be ready for the moment Judge Halden looked at me. The trap was not just set, it was baited, and the wolf was already chewing on the trigger. The hallway outside courtroom for B was a place I had walked 1,000 times. I knew exactly how many tiles stretched from the security checkpoint to the double oak doors. I knew which fluorescent light flickered on rainy days. I knew that the air conditioning vent above the water fountain rattled if you stood too close to it. For 5 years, this corridor had been my workplace, my territory. I walked these floors carrying files for other people, invisible and efficient. Today, however, the hallway felt like a foreign country, and I was an invader. I arrived 30 minutes early for the pre-hearing conference. I expected to be alone, to have a moment to center myself before the gavel fell. I was wrong. The Harrington family was already there. They stood in a tight, impenetrable cluster near the benches, a wall of black wool and dark resentment. When I stepped off the elevator, the conversation stopped. It was instant, like a radio being unplugged. 10 pairs of eyes turned toward me. There was no warmth in them. There was no shared grief for the woman we had buried less than 2 weeks ago. There was only calculation and anger. My Aunt Connie was the first to break the line. She walked toward me, her heels clicking sharply on the linoleum. She did not look like an aunt today. She looked like a creditor. "I hope you are happy," she said, her voice low and shaking. "Brad tells me the bank has frozen the distribution account because of you. The account is frozen because the court ordered it." "Aunt Connie," I said, keeping my hands at my sides. "It is standard procedure when there is a dispute regarding the validity of the assets." "Validity," she scoffed. "You use these big words to hide what you are really doing. You are jealous, Tatum. That is all this is. You cannot stand that Grandma trusted Raymond more than she trusted you. You cannot stand that you are just a clerk and he is a businessman. It is not about jealousy," I said. It is about the truth. The truth. Cousin Brad stepped up behind his mother. He looked tired. I knew he had already put a deposit down on a new truck, expecting the inheritance check to clear by Friday. The truth is that you are costing us money. Every day this drags on. The lawyers eat up more of the pie. You are not saving the estate. Tatum, you are bleeding it dry. I looked at them. I looked at my cousins, my aunts, the people I had spent every Christmas with for 3 decades. They were not asking if Raymond had forged the signature. They were not asking if Grandma had been coerced. They were not asking if the sale to the shell company was ethical. They were only asking when they would get paid. Does it matter to any of you what Grandma Evelyn actually wanted? I asked quietly. She wanted us to be taken care of, Connie snapped. She wanted Raymond to handle it because she knew he was the only one strong enough to do it. And look at you, disrespecting her memory by dragging her son into court. Raymond separated himself from the group. Then he walked over slowly, his hands in his pockets, his face arranged into a mask of weary patience. He played the martyr. Well, it is okay, Connie, Raymond said, placing a hand on her shoulder. Tatum is just confused. She is grieving. We all grieve in different ways. Some of us build and some of us destroy. He looked at me with eyes that were cold and dead. I only did what Mom asked me to do. Tatum, he said softly. She begged me to take the burden off her. She looked me in the eye and said, Raymond, sell the land. Take care of the family. I am fulfilling her dying wish. Why are you trying to punish me for that? It was a beautiful lie. If I did not have the metadata, if I did not have the flight logs, if I did not have the recordings, I might have believed him. He sounded so sincere. She begged you. I asked on October 1st in Las Vegas. Raymond's eye twitched. Just a fraction. We have been over this. We have, I said. And the judge is going to go over it again. Mr. Sterling, Raymond's lawyer, stepped between us. He was smooth, polished, and smelled of expensive leather. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single envelope. Ms. Henderson, Sterling said, "Can we have a word?" Privately. He gestured toward the alcove near the window. I walked over, keeping my distance. I knew what was coming. "This has gone far enough," Sterling said, keeping his voice low so the family could not hear the specifics. "Raymond is willing to be generous. He understands that you feel left out. He understands that your administrative role does not provide a lot of financial security." He held out the envelope. "There is a cashier's check in here for $25,000. Sterling said, "Consider it in advance on your portion of the estate, a gesture of good faith. All you have to do is sign a stipulation dismissing the injunction and withdrawing your objection to the deed." I looked at the envelope. $25,000. To them, it was a crumb. To the Tatum, they thought they knew it was a year's rent. "And if I take this," I said, "the sale to Vidian Ventures goes through the shell company owned by your firm." Sterling's smile did not waver, but his eyes hardened. "I would advise you to be careful with your terminology, Ms. Henderson. Standard real estate holding structures are not nefarious. They are smart business. But yes, if you sign, the deal proceeds. The family gets their money and everyone goes home happy, including you." I looked past him at the family. They were watching us, hope written on their faces. They wanted me to take the envelope. They wanted me to sell out so they could buy their cars and pay their debts. "I do not want the money," I said. "Everyone wants money," Sterling said. "Do not be naive. 50,000, I can have a new check cut in an hour." "I am not selling the truth, Mr. Sterling," I said. "And I am not selling my grandmother." "You are making a mistake," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You are going to walk into that courtroom and Judge Halden is going to destroy you. You are a pro-litigant going up against a 30-year firm. We will bury you in paperwork. We will bankrupt you with sanctions. Take the check. No, I said. I turned and walked away from him. I went back to the bench where I had left my briefcase. I felt a profound sense of loneliness. I was the only one on my side of the aisle. The entire weight of my bloodline was pressing against me. Then I felt a tug on my sleeve. I turned around. It was Great Aunt Beatrice. Beatrice was 82, the quietest of the Harrington siblings. She rarely spoke at dinners. She sat in the corner and knitted, observing everything but saying nothing. Raymond usually ignored her because she had no money and no power. "Tatum," she whispered. Her voice was like dry paper. "Hello, Aunt Beatrice," I said gently. "I am sorry about all this." She looked over her shoulder to make sure Raymond was not watching. He was busy arguing with Brad about something. Beatrice reached into her oversized handbag. She pulled out a small worn prayer book. She opened it and took out a folded piece of blue stationery. "She gave this to me," Beatrix said, her hand trembling. "Last Easter when you were in the kitchen washing dishes and Raymond was shouting at the television." "Who gave it to you?" I asked. "Evelyn," Beatrix said. "She told me to keep it. She said she did not want Raymond to see it. She said he would burn it." I took the paper. I unfolded it carefully. It was handwritten. The ink was shaky, but the slant was unmistakable. It was my grandmother's writing, real writing, not the trace simulation on the power of attorney. I read the words. "My dear sister, I am tired. Raymond is pushing me again. He brings papers every day. He tells me I'm losing my mind. He tells me the government will take the house if I do not sign it over to him. I do not understand the words he uses. I am afraid of him, Beatrice. He gets so angry when I ask questions. If anything happens to me, tell Tatum. Tell her I never wanted to sell the lake. If my son forces me to sign papers, tell Tatum to look closely. Trust your eyes, not his words. Love, Evelyn." Tears pricked my eyes. It was not a legal will. It was not a notarized affidavit, but it was a voice from the grave. It was the confirmation I had needed in my soul, even if I already had the proof in my data. "Why didn't you show this to anyone?" I asked Beatrice. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Raymond controls the trust. He pays for my assisted living if I cross him." "I understand," I said. "Thank you, Beatrice. You are brave." "She loved you, Tatum." Beatrice said she was proud of you. "She always said you were the only one who understood that the truth matters more than the show." Beatrice squeezed my arm and shuffled back to the group before anyone noticed. I did not waste a second. I walked straight to the clerk's intake window down the hall. I knew the procedure. I could file supplemental evidence up until the moment the hearing started. "Hey, Tatum," the clerk said. He looked tired. "Rough day." "You have no idea, Mike." I said, "I need to file this supplemental Exhibit G, character evidence regarding undue influence and state of mind." He stamped it. The blue paper was now part of the record. It was locked in. Raymond could not burn it now. I walked back toward the courtroom doors. The bailiff opened them. It was time. The family began to file in. They walked past me without looking. A procession of hostility. Raymond waited until the end. He adjusted his cufflinks. He smoothed his tie. He looked every inch the successful tycoon. He stopped next to me. The hallway was empty now, except for the two of us. He leaned in close. I could smell the mint on his breath and the underlying scent of stale tobacco. "You really think a letter from an old woman is going to save you?" he whispered. "It is not about saving me," I said. Raymond chuckled. It was a dark, ugly sound. "You are just a filer, Tatum. You move paper from box A to box B. That is your whole life. You think because you found a few glitches in the system that you are a player. You are nothing. He stepped closer, invading my space. I have the best lawyers in the state, he hissed. I have the money. I have the family. You have a laptop and a grudge. Do not dream of winning against the people who make the laws. We did this legally because we defined what legal is. You are going to walk out of here with nothing, no family, no money, no job. I will ruin you. Tatum. I looked him in the eye. I did not blink. You defined what legal is, I said calmly. But you forgot to check who checks the logs. Logs? Raymond scoffed. Nobody cares about the logs. Judge Halden might, I said. Raymond's confidence faltered for a second. He knew the name. Everyone knew the name, but he recovered quickly. He is just a judge, Raymond said. And I am the executive. He turned and walked into the courtroom, his head held high. I stood there for a moment, clutching my briefcase. My hand was still holding the copy of Aunt Beatrix's letter. I took a deep breath. He was right about one thing. I was just a filer. I was a person who respected the sanctity of the record. I believe that when you wrote something down, when you stamped it, when you filed it, it became the truth. And Raymond had tried to overwrite the truth. He thought he was walking into a room where his money would speak for him. He was wrong. He was walking into my office. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into the arena. The bailiff called the court to order at 9 o'clock sharp. All rise. The Superior Court of Ashford County is now in session. The Honorable Marcus Halden presiding. The rustle of fabric was the only sound as 60 people stood in unison. The air in courtroom for B was scrubbed and recycled, smelling of floor wax and fear. I stood at the plaintiff's table. To my left, the defense table was crowded. Raymond sat in the middle, flanked by Mr. Sterling and a junior associate who looked like he had not slept in a week. Behind them, the gallery was a sea of black wool and hushed whispers. My entire family was there. Aunt Linda, Aunt Connie, Cousin Brad, Great-Aunt Beatrice, though she looked at her shoes, and a dozen others. They sat in rows like a choir, united in their disapproval of me. They were the wall. I was alone at my table. My side of the aisle was empty. I had placed my briefcase on the table, aligned perfectly with the edge. I had my exhibits stacked in color-coded folders. I did not look back at them. I kept my eyes on the bench. Judge Halden swept into the room. He was a man made of sharp angles and granite. He wore his robes like armor. He did not look at the gallery. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and opened the file in front of him. Be seated, he said. His voice was gravel. We sat. Case number 24, Pro 0992. Halden read. Estate of Evelyn Harrington. Motion for preliminary injunction and temporary restraining order regarding the disposition of real property. He looked up. His eyes scanned the defense table, noting the expensive suits. Then his gaze slid to me. He paused for a fraction of a second, perhaps recognizing me from the hallways, perhaps just noting the solitude appearances. Halden said. Mr. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket with a practiced flourish. Julian Sterling, representing the executive, Raymond Harrington, and the estate. Tatum Henderson, I said, standing up. Petitioner. Counsel for the petitioner? Halden asked, looking past me for a lawyer who was not there. I am representing myself, Your Honor, I said. A ripple of sound went through the gallery behind me. A scoff, a whisper. She is crazy. She is cheap. I heard Aunt Connie's distinctive sigh. Mr. Sterling smirked. He did not try to hide it. He looked at the judge with a knowing expression as if to say, let's get this over with quickly. Procky, Halden said. He did not smile. Ms. Henderson, this is a complex probate matter involving significant assets and allegations of fraud. You understand that you will be held to the same evidentiary standards as opposing counsel. The court cannot offer you legal advice. I understand, Your Honor, I said. I do not need advice. I need the court to look at the data. Halden nodded once. Very well, Mr. Sterling. You may proceed. Why should this court lift the temporary freeze on the assets? Sterling walked to the podium. He moved with the confidence of a man who plays golf with senators. He placed a heavy hand on the stack of documents he had brought. Your Honor, Sterling began, his voice rich in baritone. This case is a tragedy, not because of the legal merits, of which there are none, but because it represents a disgruntled beneficiary attempting to weaponize the court system against her own family. He picked up the deed. He held it aloft like a holy relic. We have here a quit-claim deed, Sterling said, signed by the decedent, Evelyn Harrington, on October 1st. It is notarized. It is witnessed. It is recorded with the county clerk. It is a public record. Carries the presumption of validity. He dropped it onto the podium. Thud. He picked up the power of attorney. We have here a durable power of attorney. He continued, granting my client, Raymond Harrington, full authority to manage the estate. Signed, notarized, valid. Thud. He picked up the bank transfer receipt. And finally, we have the sale documents. The property in question was sold to a third-party investment firm, Vidian Ventures, for $4.5 million. The funds have been wired. The title has passed. The transaction is complete. Everything my client did was legal. Everything was done to protect the legacy of his mother. Sterling turned to look at me, his eyes full of pity. Ms. Henderson claims without a shred of hard evidence that these documents are forged. She relies on conspiracy theories and a fundamental misunderstanding of electronic filing procedures. To maintain this injunction is to paralyze the estate and cause financial harm to the very heirs she claims to care about. We ask that the case be dismissed. He sat down. Raymond patted him on the back. The family behind them murmured their approval. See hearsay. Nonsense. Ms. Henderson. Judge Halden said. Your response. I stood up. I did not go to the podium. I stayed at my table where my laptop was connected to the courtroom's presentation system. Your Honor, I said. My voice was not loud, but it was clear. I did not use adjectives. I used verbs and nouns. Mr. Sterling is correct about one thing. The presumption of validity attaches to recorded documents. However, that presumption is rebuttable upon a showing of clear and convincing evidence of fraud. I tapped a key on my laptop. The large screen on the wall behind the judge flickered to life. I am not here to argue about my feelings, I said. I am here to argue about physics, specifically the physics of time and space. I brought up Exhibit A, the timeline. The defense claims the decedent signed the deed on October 1st at a notary office in Las Vegas, Nevada. I said they claim she was present. She was, Raymond blurted out from the table. Mr. Harrington, Halden snapped without looking at him. Silence, I continued. If Evelyn Harrington was in Las Vegas on October 1st, she would have needed to travel there. She was 89 years old. She was bedridden. There are no flight records for her, but we do not need flight records. We have the notary. I click to the next slide. Exhibit C, the Instagram feed. This is the social media account of Sarah Jenkins, the notary who supposedly witnessed the signature. I said on October 1st, at the exact time the document was stamped. Ms. Jenkins was geotagged at a conference in Orlando, Florida, 3,000 m away. Sterling stood up. Objection, hearsay. Authentication of social media records overruled. Halden said, leaning forward. It is a self-authenticating business record if accompanied by the metadata which I see in the binder. Continue. If the notary was in Florida, I said. Then who stamped the document in Nevada? I clicked again. Exhibit D, the video. This is security footage from the parking lot of the notary service in Las Vegas on October 1st. I said, obtained via subpoena from the property management company. The video started playing. The courtroom was silent. The black SUV pulled into the frame. That is the rental vehicle rented by Raymond Harrington. I said, we see the driver exit. On the screen, Raymond stepped out. He looked exactly as he did now, just without the fear in his eyes. He enters the shop alone, I narrated. He exits 9 minutes later alone. I paused the video. I zoomed in on the car. Mr. Sterling claims Evelyn Harrington was in the car. I said, this is a two-door Jeep Wrangler. It has soft plastic windows. The sun is shining directly through the vehicle. You can see the silhouette of the headrests. I pointed to the screen. There is no one in the passenger seat. There is no one in the back seat. There is no wheelchair. The silence in the room changed texture. It went from bored to electric. I heard a gasp from the gallery. It sounded like Great Aunt Beatrix. The grantor was not present. I said the notary was not present. Therefore, the deed is void. Abinio. It is a nullity. It does not matter that it was recorded. You cannot record a lie and make it true. I turned to look at Raymond. He was staring at the screen, his face pale. He was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. But it goes deeper. I said, Mr. Sterling mentioned the sale to Vidian Ventures. He called it a third-party transaction. I clicked to the next slide. Exhibit F. The shell structure. Vidian Ventures is managed by Apex Holdings. I explained, tracing the line on the screen. Apex Holdings is managed by Blue Water Management, and Blue Water Management lists its primary mailing address as 124 Oak Street, Suite 400. I looked at Mr. Sterling. That is your office, counselor. Mr. Sterling froze. He did not object. He could not object. He knew exactly what the address was. The buyer is not a third party, I said. The buyer is the executive and his counsel. This is self-ding. This is a fraudulent conveyance designed to strip the equity from the estate before the heirs can ask questions. They move the asset to a company they control, and they claimed the money was gone. I closed my laptop. The screen went black. I am not asking the court to decide the entire case today. I said, addressing Judge Halden. I am asking for a preliminary injunction. The standard is a likelihood of success on the merits and a risk of irreparable harm. If you lift the freeze, they will liquidate the property through their shell company and the asset will vanish. The harm is not just probable. Your Honor, it is happening right now. I sat down. The room was dead quiet. No one moved. The wall of family behind Raymond felt like it was crumbling brick by brick. They were looking at the screen, then at Raymond, then at Sterling. Judge Halden took off his glasses. He cleaned them slowly with a microfiber cloth. He put them back on. He did not look at me. He looked at the defense table. Mr. Sterling, Halden said. His voice was dangerously soft. Did you draft the articles of organization for Vidian Ventures? Sterling stood up. He looked smaller than he had 5 minutes ago. Your Honor, as corporate counsel, I facilitate the formation of various entities for clients. It is standard practice to use the firm's address for service of process to protect client privacy. Privacy, Halden repeated, or concealment. There is no conflict, Your Honor, Sterling stammered. The entity was formed to facilitate the transaction. To facilitate a transaction between the executive and himself, Halden asked. Sterling opened his mouth, but no words came out. Judge Halden turned his eyes to Raymond. Mr. Harrington, the judge said. Raymond stood up. He looked shaky. He smoothed his tie, but his hands were trembling. Yes, Your Honor. I have a simple question, Halden said. I do not want to hear from your lawyer. I want to hear from you. Okay. Raymond whispered. You stated in your affidavit that your mother, Evelyn Harrington, signed that deed in your presence. Halden said. He picked up the piece of paper Sterling had slammed onto the podium earlier. Yes, Raymond said. She did. And you stated she was in Las Vegas, Halden continued. Yes, Raymond said. We made a trip. Halden leaned over the bench. He looked like a hawk circling a field mouse. Look at the screen. Mr. Harrington, Halden said, gesturing to the paused video of the empty car. Tell me, where was she? Raymond looked at the screen. He looked at the empty seat where his mother should have been. He licked his lips. He looked at Sterling, but Sterling was staring at his desk, distancing himself from the blast radius. She was, Raymond started, his voice cracked. She was tired. She was lying down in the back under a blanket. You cannot see her. Under a blanket, Halden repeated flatly. In a rental Jeep in 90 degrees heat. Yes, Raymond said. She was frail. And the notary? Halden asked. The one who was in Disney World? Raymond blinked. Maybe the notary made a mistake with the date. Or maybe she has a twin. I do not know. I just know we went to the office. Which office? Halden fired back. The one in the video where you walked in alone. I went in to get the paperwork. Raymond shouted, his composure snapping. I brought it out to the car. She signed it in the car. You just said you went into the office. Halden said. Now you say you brought it to the car. It was a long day. Raymond stammered. I might have the details mixed up, but she signed it. She wanted me to have it. Did she? Halden asked. The judge picked up the blue piece of paper I had filed just before the hearing. Because the petitioner has submitted a handwritten letter from the dedent. Halden said dated 6 months ago, in which she explicitly warns her sister that you were pressuring her. She writes, if my son forces me to sign papers, tell Tatum to look closely. Halden looked at me. For the first time, there was something like respect in his eyes. She looked closely. Mr. Harrington, Halden said. She looked very closely. Raymond's mouth opened and closed. He looked back at the family. Aunt Connie had her hand over her mouth. Cousin Brad was shaking his head. They were seeing it. Finally, they were seeing the man behind the checkbook. She is lying, Raymond whispered. But there was no power in it. It is all a trick. The metadata, it is fake. She works in it. She hacked it. Mr. Sterling, Halden said, ignoring Raymond. Does your client wish to amend his testimony regarding the location of the signatory? Sterling stood up slowly. He knew when a ship was sinking. He was not going to go down with it. Your Honor, Sterling said. I believe my client may have misremembered the specific logistics of the execution of the document due to the stress of his mother's passing. Perhaps we could take a brief recess. No recess, Halden said. His voice was like a hammer strike. Mr. Harrington, Halden said. One last chance. Before I refer this transcript to the district attorney's office for perjury. The room held its breath. Where? Halden asked, enunciating every syllable. Did Evelyn Harrington sign that piece of paper? Raymond looked at the judge. He looked at me. His eyes were wide, panicked, searching for an exit that did not exist. Raymond started. He swallowed hard. She signed it. He stopped. The silence stretched out for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. He couldn't say it because if he said at home, he admitted the notary stamp was a lie. If he said in Vegas, he contradicted the video. If he said she didn't, he admitted to forgery. He was trapped in the geometry of his own deception. Raymond choked out and then he said nothing. He just slumped back into his chair. The wall of paper in front of him looking less like a fortress and more like kindling waiting for a match. Judge Halden watched him for a long moment. Then he turned his gaze to me. "Proceed, Ms. Henderson," the judge said softly. "I think you have everyone's attention." The silence in courtroom 4B was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a verdict, heavy and suffocating. Raymond stood there, trapped between his own contradictory lies. The judge had asked him where his mother was, and Raymond had no answer that didn't lead to a prison cell. I watched him. I watched the sweat bead on his forehead. I watched his eyes dart to Mr. Sterling, who was studiously examining a smudge on his mahogany table, refusing to make eye contact. Raymond was alone. The wall of family behind him had gone quiet, their murmurs of support replaced by the rustle of shifting bodies and uneasy glances. Then Raymond did something that made the air leave the room. He threw his head back and laughed. It was not a nervous chuckle. It was a loud barking laugh that bounced off the high ceiling and the wooden benches. It was the laugh of a man who had decided that if he could not win the game, he would flip the board over. "This is ridiculous," Raymond said, his voice booming. He turned his back on Judge Halden. He turned his back on me. He faced the gallery, addressing Aunt Connie, Cousin Brad, and the rest of the clan directly. "Look at her," Raymond said, pointing a shaking finger at me over his shoulder. "Look at what she is doing. She is twisting everything. Dates, times, maps. It is all smoke and mirrors. She is just angry because she is broke and we are not. She is trying to confuse you with technicalities because she knows she lost the moral argument." "Mr. Harrington," Judge Halden warned, his voice like a thunderclap, "face the bench." Raymond ignored him. He was manic now, fueled by adrenaline and narcissism. "We did this legally," Raymond shouted, throwing his hands up. "We paid the fees. We filed the forms. We hired the lawyers. That is what legal means. It means the paperwork is done. You think a timestamp matters? You think a typo matters? We sold the land. The money is real. I saved this family while she was playing detective." He spun around to face me, his eyes wide and wild. "You want to talk about the law, Tatum? The law protects ownership and I own it. We did this legally," he repeated, laughing again as if the phrase were a magic spell that could ward off the truth. "The judge knows it. The lawyer knows it. You are the only one who doesn't get it." He was still smiling when I reached into my folder and pulled out the document I had been saving for this exact moment. I did not shout. I did not interrupt his tantrum. I simply walked forward and placed a stapled packet of papers on the judge's bench. Then I walked over to the defense table and dropped a copy in front of Mr. Sterling. Finally, I placed the third copy on the railing in front of the gallery, right where Aunt Connie could see it. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through Raymond's noise. "Petitioner offers Exhibit H, the audit trail." Raymond stopped laughing. He looked at the paper I had just put down. "What is this?" he sneered. "More cartoons." "Mr. Sterling," Judge Halden said, opening the packet. "Do you recognize this data structure?" Sterling looked at the document. His face went gray. He did not speak. "This," I said, turning to the screen and plugging in my laptop one last time, "is a subpoenaed report from the third-party vendor that manages the county's e-recording servers, not the county clerk's office. Raymond, the cloud provider that hosts the data." I brought the image up on the big screen. It was a grid of numbers, dates, and IP addresses. "You were right about one thing, Raymond," I said. "You did the paperwork, but you forgot that digital paperwork leaves footprints that you cannot wipe away." I pointed to line 4 on the spreadsheet. "This log shows that the file containing the quitclaim deed was accessed and modified after it was uploaded to the recording portal." I said the system shows a packet injection, a method used to swap a page within a PDF without breaking the file container. I looked at the judge. The file was opened at 10:14 in the evening on October 4th. I said 2 hours after the dead clerk login was used to accept it. So someone fixed a typo. Raymond scoffed. So what? That is administrative. We traced the IP address of the computer that performed the swap. I continued, ignoring him. I highlighted the number on the screen. IP address 192.168.4412. That is a static IP address. I said registered to a commercial business account. I clicked the next slide. It was a registration query from the Internet Service Provider. Subscriber Sterling Associates, Legal Counsel, Service Address 124 Oak Street. The room gasped. It was audible this time, a sharp intake of breath from 50 people. Judge Halden turned his gaze to Mr. Sterling. The lawyer was staring at his hands, his career dissolving in real time. Counsel, Halden said, "Why was your firm's server accessing a county record to modify it after it had been officially filed?" Sterling opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He was done. He knew it. "But that is not the worst part," I said. I turned to Raymond. He was still standing there, but the smile was gone. He looked confused like a man trying to read a map in a foreign language. "Raymond," I said, "do you remember the text message you sent to the family group chat last week? The one where you called me an amateur?" "I sent a lot of texts," he muttered. "You sent a file," I said. "You sent a PDF of the deed to prove that my version was blurry. You said, 'I have the original right here.'" I clicked the remote. 2 documents appeared on the screen side by side. On the left, I said, "Is the deed filed with the court, the one modified by Mr. Sterling's office?" On the right, "Is the deed you sent to the family group chat from your personal computer?" I zoomed in on the bottom of the page. In the digital world, every file has a hash value. I explained it is a unique alphanumeric string calculated based on the contents of the file. If you change a single pixel, the hash value changes completely. I pointed to the numbers below the documents filed Deed 7 Group Chat Deed 3, B22X. "They do not match," I said. I turned to the gallery. Aunt Connie was staring at the screen, her mouth slightly open. "The document Raymond showed you," I said to my family, "is not the document he filed with the county. He has 2 different versions of the original. One has a clause about mineral rights. The other does not. One has the signature slightly tilted to the left. The other is straight." I looked back at Raymond. "You have multiple versions of the forgery, Raymond, and you got confused. You sent the draft to the family and you filed the final version with the court. You lost track of your own lies." Raymond looked at the screen. He looked at the 2 documents that were supposed to be identical. He looked at the numbers that proved they were not. "That is a glitch," Raymond stammered. "Computers make mistakes. Hash algorithms do not make mistakes." Judge Halden interrupted. His voice was no longer soft. It was steel. The judge looked at me. For a moment, the courtroom fell away. It was just 2 professionals acknowledging a checkmate. He saw what I had done. I hadn't just proven the deed was fake. I had proven that Raymond and his lawyer had actively conspired to alter public records and deceive the court. Judge Halden turned slowly to face Raymond. "Mr. Harrington," the judge said, "you stood in my courtroom 5 minutes ago and told me you did this legally." "It is legal," Raymond insisted. But his voice was high and thin now. "I am the executive. I have the power." "You have nothing," Halden said, "because you have just authenticated the petitioner's evidence." The judge slammed his hand down on the file. "By submitting that text message to the group chat which was provided to the petitioner by a member of your own family, I assume." He looked at me. I nodded. "Cousin Brad forwarded it to me, Your Honor, unknowingly." Brad let out a small whimper in the back row. "By submitting that file," Halden continued, "you proved you had custody of a fraudulent document. You proved tampering. The judge picked up his gavel. He did not bang it. He held it like a weapon. Petitioner, Halden said to me, what is your request? I stood straight. My heart was pounding, but my voice was ice. I request an immediate and permanent injunction freezing all assets of the estate of Evelyn Harrington. I said, I request that the sale to Vidian Ventures be vacated as a fraudulent conveyance. I took a breath. And Your Honor, pursuant to the mandatory reporting guidelines for officers of the court, I request that this matter be referred to the district attorney for investigation into wire fraud, forgery, and perjury. No, Raymond shouted. He lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the bench. You cannot do that. This is a family matter. She is just a vindictive little girl. Sit down, the bailiff barked, stepping forward and placing a hand on his holster. Raymond froze. He looked around the room. He looked at the family. They were not looking at him. Aunt Connie was crying into a tissue. Aunt Beatrice was clutching her prayer book. Mr. Sterling was packing his briefcase with the frantic speed of a man trying to flee a burning building. Mr. Sterling, Judge Halden said, do not leave this room. Sterling stopped. He sat back down, his head in his hands. Judge Halden looked at Raymond. The look was withering. It stripped away the suit, the title, the arrogance. It left only a small, greedy man standing in the wreckage of his own hubris. Mr. Harrington, Halden said, you seemed to find this situation amusing a moment ago. You laughed. You told this courtroom that you did this legally. The judge leaned forward. Let me explain something to you about the law. Legal is not a stamp. Legal is not a shell company. Legal is the truth. And you have treated this court and your mother's memory with absolute contempt. Raymond opened his mouth to speak. Silence, Halden commanded. The judge reached for a new form on his desk. He began to write. The scratching of his pen was the only sound in the room. I am granting the injunction, Halden said, not looking up. I am appointing an independent special administrator to take over the estate immediately. You are removed as executive effective this second. He looked up, and regarding the criminal referral, Raymond's knees seemed to buckle. He gripped the table. I am holding you in direct contempt of court for perjury committed in my presence. Halden said, Bailiff, take Mr. Harrington into custody. What? Raymond gasped. You can't. I have to pick up my kids. I have a meeting. You have the right to remain silent, Halden said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. And I strongly suggest, for the first time in your life, you use it. The judge looked at Raymond with eyes that burned because from this moment on, Mr. Harrington, every word you speak can and will be used against you. The time for laughing is over. Two bailiffs moved in. One grabbed Raymond's left arm, the other his right. The click of the handcuffs was loud and final. Raymond looked at me. His eyes were filled with shock. He couldn't process it. He was the patriarch. He was the businessman. I was just the clerk. Tatum, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Tell them it's a mistake. We can fix this. I will give you the money. I will give you half. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had bullied my grandmother, who had drugged her, who had stolen her legacy and tried to sell it for parts. It is not my job to fix it, Raymond, I said softly. I just filed the paperwork. I turned back to the judge. Halden nodded to me. It was a small, almost imperceptible nod. Acknowledgement. The bailiffs dragged Raymond toward the side door. He was still sputtering, still trying to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, that it was all legal. But as the heavy door closed behind him, cutting off his protests, the only thing left in the room was the truth, and the silence was beautiful. The bailiffs held Raymond by the arms. But Judge Halden raised a hand, signaling them to pause. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut still echoed in the high ceilings of the courtroom, a metallic finality that silenced the gallery. But the judge was not finished. He was a man who believed in the completeness of the record. He wanted every loose end cauterized before the body was moved. Mr. Sterling remained seated, his face the color of old ash. He knew his career was ending in this room. He stared at the table, refusing to look at the client he had helped defraud, or the judge who was about to dismantle his firm. Judge Halden turned his attention to the back of the courtroom. "Lydia, stand up," he commanded. Lydia, my grandmother's caregiver, rose slowly from the back bench. She was trembling. She had been sitting behind Aunt Connie, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear into the woodwork. She wore her scrubs as if she had come straight from a shift. Or perhaps she wore them to remind everyone of her service. It did not matter. "Come to the railing," Halden said. Lydia walked forward, clutching her purse with white knuckles. She looked at Raymond, then quickly looked away. "Ms. Henderson has submitted text logs indicating that you were instructed to isolate the D-dent," Halden said. He held up the transcript I had provided. "Is this true? Did Mr. Harrington instruct you to prevent the petitioner from seeing her grandmother?" Lydia looked at me. Her eyes were wet. She was not a bad person. I knew that she was a woman who needed a paycheck, and Raymond was the one who signed the checks. But fear of prison is a powerful motivator for the truth. He told me it was for her own good. Lydia whispered. Her voice was thin, barely audible. "He said Tatum. He said she would upset Evelyn. He said if I let Tatum in, he would fire me and make sure I never worked in this county again." "And the day of the signing," Halden asked. "The day you claimed she was in Las Vegas." Lydia began to cry. She put a hand over her mouth. "She never left the house." Lydia sobbed. "She was in pain that day. She slept almost the whole time. Raymond went alone. He told me if anyone asked, I was to say she went with him. He said it was just paperwork. He said it was what she wanted." Raymond struggled against the baif's grip. "She is lying," he shouted, though the fight had gone out of his voice. "She is just a nurse. She doesn't know anything." Judge Halden ignored him. He looked at me. "Ms. Henderson." The judge said, "You mentioned an estate plan summary." I nodded. I walked back to my table and picked up the final document. This was the one I had kept in reserve. The blue letter from Aunt Beatrice established the emotional truth, but this document established the legal intent. "Your Honor," I said, "I present Exhibit 1. This is a summary of the estate planning consultation my grandmother attended in 2018. It was retrieved from the files of the independent counsel she visited without Raymond's knowledge." I handed the document to the clerk who passed it to the judge. "This summary was drafted by a disinterested third party." I continued, "It is witnessed by 2 paralegals who are not related to this family." I pointed to the highlighted section on the screen. It reads, "Client expresses clear intent that the lakefront property is not to be sold. Client wishes to place the property in a trust for the sole benefit of her granddaughter, Tatum Henderson, whom she identifies as the only family member interested in preservation rather than liquidation." The gasps from the gallery were different this time. They were not gasps of shock. They were gasps of realization. Aunt Connie turned to look at Cousin Brad. Brad looked at the floor. For years, Raymond had told them that Grandma Evelyn thought I was incompetent. He had told them she wanted him to be the king. The document proved that she had seen through him years ago. She had seen the greed in his heart long before he ever forged a deed. Raymond saw the document on the screen. He saw the date. He saw the witnesses. She was confused. Raymond yelled, his face twisting into a mask of desperate ugliness. "That was years ago. She changed her mind. She told me in the car. When we were driving to Vegas, she told me she wanted me to have it all. The room went deadly silent. I looked at Raymond. He had just done it. He had just walked into the final trap. Judge Halden slowly took off his glasses. He leaned over the bench, staring down at Raymond with a look of absolute incredulity. "Mr. Harrington," Halden said softly, "you just stated that she told you this in the car while driving to Las Vegas." "Yes," Raymond said, thinking he had found a lifeline. "We talked the whole way. She was lucid," she said. "Raymond, you take it. You deserve it." Judge Halden pointed a long finger at the video screen, which was still frozen on the image of the black SUV in the parking lot. The image where the passenger seat was clearly undeniably empty. "So you are telling this court," Halden said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream, "that you had a conversation with an empty seat?" Raymond froze. He looked at the screen. He looked at the judge. He realized too late that in his desperation to invent a conversation to override the written will, he had anchored himself to the very trip that had been proven impossible. Raymond stammered, "You just confirmed your own perjury." Halden said, "You claimed she was in the car to justify the conversation. The video proves she was not. Therefore, the conversation never happened. And if the conversation never happened, your claim to her intent is a fabrication." The judge sat back. He picked up his pen. "The court finds by clear and convincing evidence that the quitclaim deed recorded on October 4th is a forgery." Halden announced the document is hereby declared void ab initio. The transfer of title to Vidian Ventures is vacated. He signed the order with a sharp scratching sound. Furthermore, Halden continued, "The court finds that Raymond Harrington has breached his fiduciary duty as executive. He has engaged in self-dealing, fraud, and embezzlement. He is removed as executive effective immediately." The judge looked at the gallery. He looked at my family, who were now shrinking away from Raymond as if he were contagious. "I am appointing an independent third-party administrator to manage the assets of the estate of Evelyn Harrington." Halden ruled the first duty of that administrator will be to recover the $4.5 million transferred to the shell company controlled by Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling put his head on the table. And finally, Halden said, looking at the baifs, "Take him away." As the baifs began to drag Raymond toward the door, he started to scream. It wasn't a coherent defense anymore. It was just noise. "I did it for us," he shouted at the family. "I did it for the legacy. It was legal. The papers were stamped." He passed by my table. He stopped fighting for a second, just long enough to look at me. His eyes were red, rimmed with the madness of a man who believes his own lies. "You ruined everything," he hissed. "You are just a clerk. You do not understand how the world works." I stood there calm and still. "I understand exactly how it works, Raymond." I said, "You leave a trail. I follow it." The baif shoved him through the door. The heavy wood slammed shut, cutting off his voice. The silence that rushed back into the room was pure and heavy. Judge Halden began to gather his files. He paused and looked at me one last time. "M. Henderson," he said. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge looked at the empty defense table, then at the terrified lawyer, and finally at me. "Legality is not a cloak for filth," Halden said. "It is not a shield you can hide behind to rob the vulnerable. In this courtroom, the law is a ruler, and today it measured the truth." He nodded to me. It was a salute from one guardian of the record to another. "Court is adjourned," he said. The gavel banged. One sharp, decisive strike. I packed my laptop. I unplugged the cables. I put my folders back into my briefcase, color-coded and organized. I felt light, the weight I had been carrying since the funeral. The weight of being the invisible niece, the weight of the family's disdain was gone. I turned to leave. My family was still sitting there. Aunt Connie looked up at me. She looked like she wanted to say something. She looked like she wanted to apologize or maybe ask if the money could still be recovered. I did not give her the chance. I walked past them. I walked past Cousin Brad, who was staring at his hands. I walked past Aunt Linda. I stopped only for a second in front of Great Aunt Beatrice. I reached out and squeezed her hand. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled. A small sad smile. She knew. I walked out of the double doors and into the hallway. The air outside the courtroom felt different. It was cooler, cleaner. I walked down the long corridor, my heels clicking on the tiles. I passed the intake window where I had spent 5 years stamping papers for other people. I passed the security checkpoint. I pushed through the front doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. The city of Ashford moved around me. Cars honked. People rushed to lunch. The world did not know that a kingdom had just fallen in courtroom for B. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a day that finally belonged to me. Raymond's words echoed in my mind. We did this legally. He had laughed when he said it. He thought it was the ultimate defense. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. I looked back at the courthouse, at the stone pillars that held up the roof, at the statue of Lady Justice standing blindfolded above the entrance. "You were right about half of it, Uncle Ray," I whispered to the wind. I started walking toward my car. I had a lot of work to do. There was an estate to organize. There was a house to save. And I had to prepare for the criminal trial where I would be the lead witness. "I will do everything legally," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "But I will do it my way."